Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 5, Day 4. But first, let's do our daily punishment. The machine at the coin factory just suddenly stopped working with no explanation. It doesn't make any sense. Sense. Key terms for today are James Duke, Gibson Girl, the New South, the National Labor Union, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, Knights of Labor, Terence Powderly, the Haymarket Riot, Big Bill Haywood, Hollywood Haywood, Joel Hill, the AFL, the Pullman Strike, the Homestead Strike, Samuel Gompers, closed shops versus open shops, Yellow Dog contracts, Eugene Debs, the Women's Trade Union League, the IWW, the Ludlow Massacre. We're going to go over characteristics of labor conditions in America in the late 1800s. We'll go over methods of labor protest, some of the first labor organizations being formed. We'll talk about some of the big strikes and the big unions during this time. First, let's talk about some of the births in America. We talked before about the Redeemers taking over the South. The South will still remain rural, although there will be some industry coming to the South after the Civil War. They called this the quote-unquote New South. An example of an industry coming to the South is the manufacturing of tobacco. You obviously already know that the South was growing tobacco all the way from like John Rolfe, but the South will start having their own factories to manufacture tobacco. James Buchanan Duke was the big robber baron for tobacco manufacturing. He will give a lot of his money away before he dies and forms Duke University. The railroads at this time will discriminate against the South. It was cheaper to send goods south, higher to send goods north, but they'll still charge more for the South just because there was less people, there was less trade there. So railroads will often put higher rates against the southern areas. Textile factories will do better in the South. Textile factories come from cotton, so there will be some textile factories forming in the South. Some factories will begin moving south. There are better tax benefits, so there will be some industry in the South during this time. However, it's still mostly going to be agricultural. We have the birth of a new form of woman during this time. So, guys, we've talked about this throughout the whole year. We had the Republican motherhood. We had the cult of domesticity, which was kind of a step back. But now we have a new idealized form of women. This is the Gibson Girl. The Gibson Girl is kind of a step up. You look at her right here. She screams modern day feminist. Oh, God, that looks so uncomfortable, that outfit. During this time, women will start to go to work. If you're a poor woman, you're working in the factories. Like middle-class women could go to work like in switchboards. Switchboards were the ones that transferred people on the phones. They could be typists. Some will get jobs as receptionist. So some women will get semi-autonomous jobs. For the Gibson Girl, it was meant to personify beauty, fulfillment, limited economic independence. So there was some economic independence, but not that much. Women were depicted a little bit as athletic. You see her. She looks built. This is going to be the feminine ideal of the woman up until World War I. It's definitely a step up from the cult of domesticity, but, I mean, obviously it's not modern-day equality, even though women don't have modern-day equality. So we're going to be talking the rest of this video about unionism and labor conditions. All right. So, in general, conditions for workers were better than any other part of the world. No factory owner in any country, they did not want to allow for labor unions. That being said, there was a lot of working condition problems in America. There was huge gaps in the wealth between the rich and the poor. The top 10% in America owned 90% of the wealth. There was no laws to limit working conditions. There was unsanitary conditions, poor paid. There was no overtime. You can get fired without cause. If you got injured on the job, there was no workers' comp. A lot of factory owners, they would make workers sign yellow dog contracts where they had to promise not to join a union and not to strike. During this time, there is going to be a debate between closed shop versus open shops. Closed shops were when, in order for you to get a job in an industry, you have to join the union. America in the late 1800s was very anti-union, so there were very few closed shop places. Open shop is you don't have to join the union. Texas is an open shop state. However, if I went to California, like California's teachers are closed shop, you have to join the union. We have to pay dues to the union in California, even if you don't want to join them. The idea is you're benefiting from the union because they're negotiating with all the teachers as a whole, so you should contribute. There were some previous things we talked about workers' conditions. Commonwealth v. Hunt from a couple units ago was one of the first laws that in Massachusetts guaranteed the right for unions. We have the Lowell girls, who are the factory workers in the textile mills for women. The National Labor Union will be formed before the Civil War. It will be the first labor union. It will be for governmental employees. It will give government employees an 8-hour workday, but it is going to die around the time of the Civil War. So let's talk about some strikes. One of the big methods unions can use to try to get their point across and get better wages is striking. So the first real big strike in American history is the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. This was a strike against the unsafe conditions of the railroads. The business people are going to say that the strikers were preventing good stuff like mail being spread from one part of the country to the other. They were interfering with the public good. So the army will be called in and the army will break up the strike. You're going to see this a lot in American history where the government takes the side of big business. So, Great Railroad Strike, unsuccessful. During this time, we are going to have the first major national labor union being formed, the Knights of Labor. They were a little bit more secretive. They would accept skilled workers. Skilled workers are workers that have a specific job that requires some kind of training, like an electrician. And they accepted unskilled workers. Unskilled workers are one that really anybody could do. It doesn't require a lot of training. So an example of an unskilled job would be like a basic factory worker in a assembly line, or like working in a fast food industry nowadays. The Knights of Labor also accepted both blacks and whites. Their leader will be Terence Powderly. They wanted to end child labor. They wanted to end using convict labor. In the South would use a lot of like convicts as basically almost like slave labor in their factories and stuff. The Knights of Labor also wanted equal pay for women in the factories, and they wanted a progressive income tax. The Knights of Labor were much more political than the AFL, which is coming later on. The Haymarket Riot is going to be what kills the Knights of Labor. The Haymarket Riot was in Chicago. It was a labor riot. What's going to happen is during the labor riot, there was a huge crowd gathered in Haymarket Square. A bomb will explode. Several dozen people will be killed, including some police officers. They're going to blame some radicals and anarchists on this. This is going to hurt the union, the Knights of Labor, by association, because they were the ones that were involved in the labor riot. And even though they didn't blow it up, like they're going to be kind of blamed for it. And after the Haymarket riot, the Knights of Labor is going to kind of die off. Also, one of the problems with the Knights of Labor is they were trying to like really kind of accept everybody. And by accepting everybody, it made it a little bit harder to get anything done. When you just have a singleness of purpose and you really only focus on one thing, it's often easier to get things done. Here's a painting of the Haymarket riot at the time. See all the police dying? So a new labor organization is going to be formed, the AFL. This is going to be formed by Samuel Gompers, who will be the first president. They only accept skilled workers, only white men. So they have a singleness of purpose. They're not going to be as interested in politics. Their only real interest is increasing wages and working conditions for skilled white men. There will be some strikes during this time. One of the big strikes is the Homestead strike. This was against one of Carnegie's steel mills. The person that Carnegie put in charge of this this mill was Frick. His name was Andrew Frick. The people are going to go on strike. There's going to be bloodshed between the state militia and union workers when Frick is going to call in strike breakers. So what happens is one of the methods that factory owners can do is they could get somebody called, they can get scabs or strike breakers. They hire people to work in the factories temporarily. The people that work in the union would call them scabs because they're kind of disgusting. They're betraying their common interest of the proletariat, and they're siding with big business. So a lot of times, strike people, because the workers were not innocent. They would beat up scabs and try to prevent them from going inside the business and helping out the factory owners. One of the big things that happens in the Homestead strike is one of the workers is going to go into Frick's office and shoot him. I think it goes through his mouth, but he actually survives. This does not make the workers look very good. Eventually, the strike will be called off. This did demonstrate that a strong employer could break a union if it hired a mercenary police force and gained government and court protection. So a lot of these strikes, they're going to be victories for business. The Pullman strike was another railroad strike against the Pullman Palace, which we talked about before. The leader was Eugene Debs, who was a pretty radical Democrat. Debs before had success in previous strikes. He led the Great Northern Railway strike earlier in the year. He's going to do the Pullman strike. This is going to paralyze the railroad traffic in Chicago to the Pacific coast. It was serious, but it was not out of hand. Debs was trying to be moderate. He was allowing mail to still go through the railroads. He didn't want to have the government turn against him. But guess what? The government will turn against him regardless. Federal troops are going to be called to end this strike because they were saying it was interfering with federal mail and soldiers being sent from one part of the country to the other. They're going to issue an injunction. The courts will issue an injunction that Debs needs to stop the strikes. Debs is going to refuse to do that. He's going to be jailed. This is where he's going to read socialist literature like Karl Marx, and he's going to leave jail being a socialist. This is going to be the first time the government uses an injunction to break a strike, and once again, victory for big business. Let's talk about some latter-day labor movements. We have the Women's Trade Union League. This was meant for women to help them organize to other unions and to be able to strike. So, for example, the WTUL was for women that produce lady garments in textile mills. We also had more radical labor unions. And we're going to talk about a little bit of radicalism right now as we end this. For the most part, a lot of these labor unions did go within the democratic process, but there were some people that were more Marxist, that were influenced by communism, that supported violence and supported political overthrowing. And the big one we have here is the IWW, also known as the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World. They're going to be a radical labor union with a political agenda that appealed to unskilled workers. So they're not going to be like the AFL. They accept unskilled and skilled workers. They want to confiscate private property and evenly divide it. So they're communist. This will not be popular with some Americans. They will super frighten a lot of rich industrialists. There will be some more bloody massacres and strikes towards the end of the century. The Ludlow Massacre was a strike that was going on by the Wobblies, or a Wobbly-supported group. And the government is going to be called in. This was a coal strike, and the National Guard is going to attack the camp the strikers were at. The strikers were in governmental land. The strikers were striking at the coal mines, and they were camped out there, so they were on private property. The National Guard will go to clear them, they'll end up shooting in the crowd. They'll kill 20 people. 11 of them are kids. It's called the Ludlow Massacre. Some of the big radical agitators during this time is you have Bill Haywood. He was the leader of the IWW, Hollywood Haywood. He's eventually going to move to communist Russia. So, bro, he was a communist. You also have Joel Hill. He was a member of the Wobblies also. In 1915, he's going to be accused of murder. Most people think he was falsely accused because he had an alibi. There was really no evidence against him, but he's really convicted for his political beliefs. He's going to be executed. He was a songwriter, and he became kind of a martyr to the radical labor movement and to kind of like communist and socialist in America. And here's a political cartoon for the Wobblies, the IWW. It's so cute. All their hands are forming a big hand. Ugh. All right, kiddos. That's all I have for you for today. Until next time. Deuces. Deuces, yeah.